Hey guys, Robbie here from CrossFit South Bend. Today we're going to try to answer the question, do I need to buy grass-fed beef and wild-caught fish? And really this is kind of a specific way of asking the more general question, how do I get the most nutritious animal products? Today we're going to talk specifically about animal products, things like fish and pork and poultry and eggs and beef and lamb and so on and so forth. We'll probably do a video in the future about produce, but today we're going to talk specifically about animal products. Now, we're not just going to focus on health, but we're also going to try to focus on kind of environmental impact and ethics. And anyone who's ever read kind of, in sort of the health space for food probably knows that this is sometimes referred to as the vegan or vegetarian trifecta. Supposedly the knockdown three arguments that make the case for veganism and vegetarianism. So a focus on health, a focus on environmental impact, and a focus on ethics. So you might be wondering, why, if here at CrossFit South Bend we're big fans of the paleo diet, would we be mentioning the vegan or vegetarian trifecta? Well, there are a couple different reasons. First of all, I think there's a tremendous amount to this perspective. Even though fundamentally I do disagree that veganism and vegetarianism are optimally healthy for you, even though I disagree that veganism and vegetarianism are best for the environment, and even though I think the ethical argument for veganism and vegetarianism is probably the strongest of the three arguments, even though I think that's probably not a knockdown, drag out argument either, I do have a tremendous amount of respect for both vegans and vegetarians, and I think they are to be commended in a number of different ways for really starting the healthy food movement back in the 70s after our eating habits kind of metaphorically fell off a cliff. With the rise of processed foods and vegetable oils. They were the ones who brought to the forefront of the discussion focusing on how foods impact our health. They were the ones who brought to the forefront of the discussion how foods have an environmental impact and how we want to try to minimize that environmental impact, and we want to make food production sustainable, not something that just destroys the earth. And lastly, they were the ones who probably more so than any other food movement out there, brought to bear this idea of ethical treatment. Now, for a vegan and a vegetarian, the whole idea of ethically killing an animal for food just isn't going to work out. But the very idea of treating an animal properly during its life, I would say, has largely been the product of veganism and vegetarianism. And I think they really are to be credited with kind of bringing all this stuff to the forefront. So again, while I ultimately disagree that that's necessarily the best way to eat, although I think there's a lot to commend that, I think the focus on plant products is absolutely 100% dead on. The only part where I probably disagree is I'd say plant products by themselves aren't sufficient for health. You're going to need some animal products too, not a whole helping of ribeyes and bacon or something like that, but you're going to need some animal products, whether it's from fish, for EPA and DHA, or beef for B12 and zinc and a bunch of other stuff. I would say that while plant products are necessary for health, they're not by themselves sufficient, and that's why you need extra stuff. But I do 100% respect the position, and I do think vegans and vegetarians are to be credited with bringing these considerations to the forefront, and I do think they are very important considerations to take into consideration. So with that all being said, let's talk about buying the best quality beef and lamb from not just a health perspective, but from an environmental perspective, and lastly from an ethical perspective. Again, if you're a vegan or vegetarian, you're just going to take issue straight off the bat with the idea that there could be any ethical way to have an animal as food. I understand that perspective, I respect it, I happen to disagree with it, but we're going to try to understand a way that you could ethically treat an animal during its life, even if it ultimately does get raised for food. Okay, so beef and lamb. So let's start off with kind of the number one point that I try to make to everyone whenever I discuss beef and lamb. Cows are supposed to eat grass, period. End of story. If you go to any other country on earth and you ask them what they feed their cows, they will look at you like an insane person, because cows naturally eat grass. It's only been in the past 100 or so years, here in America specifically, and unfortunately it's spreading to the rest of the world, but that's a very new development, that we've started feeding cows, specifically corn, because we have a surplus, stale candy, even sometimes, dead cow meat. That's how mad cow gets started, kind of animals eating other animals, that type of thing. So cows are herbivores. Cows naturally eat grass. That's their natural diet. That's what they're supposed to eat. So, and that makes a difference not just for the health of the cow, but for the nutrients that you would eventually get, in terms of conjugated linoleic acid, which is a very healthy compound. Even though beef does not contain too much in the way of omega-3s, it does contain some, especially when the cow is grass-fed. Lots of different vitamins and minerals are enhanced when cows eat grass, and that's just naturally what they're supposed to do. And when you think about it from an environmental standpoint, sometimes people make this argument, which, if I have to hear another time, it's going to be kind of tough. So, people will say things like, well, cows passing gas, that's the cause of, a lot of, excess greenhouse gases that's leading to global warming. Cows have been around for a really, 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 really long time. A really long time. Cows have been passing gas and doing whatever they're doing for a really long time. And yet, global temperatures rising has only been a feature of the past 100 or 150 years. So what's changed? Well, industrialization, industrial food production. And yes, if you produce things like corn and soy and wheat to feed your animals, and if you have to transport them and if you have them in feedlots, yeah, that's going to have a really bad environmental impact on the world. But I'm interested to hear what the environmental impact is of a cow naturally grazing on grass that is, the grass is fed by rainwater, which is naturally occurring, and sunlight, and then the cow produces manure, which then introduces healthy bacteria into soil to help even more things grow. So I'd be very interested to hear what the negative carbon impact there is. There really isn't much of one, and there's been a lot of research actually to suggest that in those more natural environments where you have natural grazers kind of eating the way they're supposed to, you get a carbon neutral or carbon negative effect where you're actually sequestering more carbon into the land by having the cows help with grass production than a carbon positive situation. So cows are supposed to eat grass. These are natural ruminants that's supposed to eat grass, and not only is it better from a health perspective, but it's better from an environmental perspective as well. So it used to be the case that grass-fed actually meant something according to the USDA. If you bought something that was grass-fed, that was regulated just like the term organic. Recently, that's been overturned, unfortunately, and they're kind of saying, hey, well, producers just come up with your own standards and we'll rely on that. The problem with that is producers have an incentive to kind of lie about, well, cows are grass-fed, but that means they're fed grass for, part of their life, not for the other part. So really, you just want to investigate where you get your meat from. You want to figure out whether it's grass-fed and grass-finished, which is the highest quality. Pretty much all cows throughout the country, whether they go to a feedlot eventually or if they're grass-finished, are initially fed grass. But there have been many studies to show that if they are fed corn for the last 6 months of their life, that dramatically decreases the omega-3 content, the vitamins and minerals, and it increases the chances very dramatically of E. coli production. So in general, you want to make sure you get grass-fed and grass-finished meat. And you want to avoid hormones and antibiotics. Yeah, antibiotic resistance is a real thing. It's not just because we as humans tend to overuse antibiotics. I'll do a whole video on that in the future. But it's because we feed antibiotics to animals who aren't sick. And one of the reasons we do that, unfortunately, is because we know it's a potent growth promoter. And the other reason we do that is because we keep them in feedlots in these atrocious, unethical conditions that lead them to get sick. They're not eating a natural diet, stale candy and corn. They're in, kind of these close quarters, and they have a tendency to get sick. And we feed them these doses of antibiotics, which leads to antibiotic-resistant bacteria. So, whatever else you think, cows, unless they're really, really, really sick, shouldn't be taking broad-spectrum antibiotics. It shouldn't be part of the feed. It shouldn't be like a general feature of their normal life, just to make them grow heavier. And the same thing with hormones. Cows should just be able to, lead a healthy life, eating what they're supposed to eat, and not being injected with these other things. Okay, so the best quality, both beef and lamb that you can get. I've mainly focused on beef because that's mainly what we eat in the States, but lamb, same goes there. Grass-fed and grass-finished, meaning that, like I said before, all cows are grass-fed, but they're not all grass-finished, especially here in the States, so you want to make sure you get grass-finished as well. Okay, fish and seafood. So fish and seafood, a couple different considerations are important. So to the extent you can, you want to get wild caught. Why? Because that's, again, where the fish are kind of eating what they're supposed to be eating, which leads to the best nutrient content, and it leads to more sustainable practices. It's actually, unfortunately, started to be the case now that in certain fish farming facilities, they will feed fish corn just because it's really, really cheap and available. The same way they feed beef corn. Say it with me: fish don't eat corn. Fish don't eat corn. And the only reason why we even would consider that beef eat corn is because we've been doing it for so long. We can't let this happen to fish too. This is not good. Another thing that recently came to pass that you may have seen in the newspapers is that fish producers were given the okay to start exploring the possibility of genetically modified fish. I'll probably do a video later on about genetic modification, pluses, minuses, all the rest of that stuff. In general, the question is why? Why do these things need to be genetically modified? Is it for our health? No, this stuff is perfectly healthy just as is. So, we really just want to try to get stuff as naturally as possible. Sustainable. So we want things to be sustainable all the way around, but I would say with fish and seafood, it becomes even more of a concern, especially this idea of overfishing, which isn't quite as much of a concern with beef, pork, poultry, and eggs, and so on and so forth. Sustainability, looking at the Marine Stewardship Council, they've got a great little handy guide to kind of finding the most sustainable fish out there that is going to not lead to overfishing. We don't want to have it be the case that fish colonies just collapse, like we can't get any more wild-caught salmon because we've just overfished them or something like that. So we really want to make sure that we get things sustainably. What about mercury? So mercury is a concern that a lot of people have, and it's a legitimate concern to have. Of course, back before industrialization, no fish on planet Earth had considerable amounts of mercury. The only reason is because we produce these, industrial gas clouds, which then rain down and get into the oceans that lead to mercury. So what's the deal with mercury? So mercury, there's kind of a few different layers here, but the biggest thing I'd say to remember is that in general, there's a caveat here. I just listened to a very interesting podcast with Chris Kresser where there are caveats here, but in general, if the fish has more selenium than mercury, selenium's a mineral. It's kind of the counterpart to iodine. If a fish has more selenium than mercury, generally it's going to be the case that mercury is not as much of a concern. Now, for most fish that we eat, like salmon, like halibut, like cod, this is going to be the case. They have more selenium than mercury. Selenium binds to the mercury and makes it less absorbable by our body. The ones to be concerned about are things like pilot whale meat, which is where the original studies in mercury with fish were done. Pilot whale meat has lots of mercury, very little selenium. Shark, swordfish, stuff like that. So in general, getting it wild caught, getting sustainable, avoiding mercury or trying to eat stuff with more selenium than mercury, you're going to be doing pretty well. They have charts about this online, so you can kind of easily find out. But like I said, most of the fish that we eat, it's going to be the case that the selenium to mercury ratio is pretty good. It's just with stuff like pilot whale meat and shark and swordfish. So best option here is going to be wild caught and sustainable fish and seafood. So not just fish, but seafood as well. So you want to make sure that your shellfish also come from a sustainable and wild caught source. Okay, so let's talk about pork and poultry. So I kind of put these both together here because there are a lot of similar things. So a lot of times I get the question, how do I get grass-fed pork? How do I get grass-fed poultry? And there's an equivalent, but it's not grass-fed pork or grass-fed poultry. It's pasture-raised, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in just a second. But basically, pigs and chickens aren't herbivores. They aren't herbivores like Like cows, they don't just eat grass. They're omnivores. They will eat insects. Sometimes they'll eat reptiles. It kind of depends. I mean, they'll also eat plant matter, but it depends on kind of what the terrain has from them. But they are omnivores. So there's no such thing as grass-fed pork and grass-fed chicken. What you're looking for is pasture-raised. Pasture-raised just meaning they're eating what they're normally supposed to eat. Now, another sort of thing that you sometimes run into with pork and poultry, specifically with pork really, is this whole claim of nitrate-free. So I bring this up because this is kind of a red herring. This really isn't a concern, and with a lot of the stuff that food producers put on their packaging, it's kind of the equivalent of greenwashing. I'm not sure if you've ever heard of that. It's where companies that are trying to make an eco-friendly product make these kind of outlandish claims about how eco-friendly their products are when they're really not that eco-friendly. It's the same thing here. Nitrate and nitrate-free. The worry with these is that by consuming nitrates and nitrates, they would convert into nitrosamines in your gut and then lead to cancerous byproducts that could eventually lead to cancer. This is really just not really that much of a concern. Celery and celery powder, which you see often as a substitute for the typical things that would be nitrate and nitrate components in bacon or something like that. Celery powder has a lot more nitrates and nitrates than even the standard stuff, so it's really just not that much of a concern. I wouldn't worry too much about it. Cage-free and free-range, again, these are kind of terms that producers throw out there just to kind of seem like they're doing the right thing, but they're not necessarily doing the right thing. Cage-free actually means something in the case of eggs, because chickens who are used to produce eggs usually, or in a lot of cases, are kept in cages. Very few, if any, chickens that are used to produce poultry meats, like boneless, skinless chicken breast and all that other stuff, are actually kept in cages. So they're trying to use this term, which actually means something over here, to kind of say, oh, well, this is really good over here, but it doesn't really mean anything in the case of chicken or turkey meat. Free range, again, it kind of sounds good, but doesn't mean too much. It could just mean, hey, you've got access to the outdoors, but you're still cramped up in a hen house and you can't actually get out for too much of the day. So in general, with all these things, you want to get these things pasture raised, which means from a local family farm where the animals are eating what they're supposed to eat, and they're not injected with excess hormones and antibiotics and all the rest of that stuff. Let's lastly talk about boneless, skinless chicken breast. The boneless, skinless chicken breast to me is very symbolic of the way in which our food culture has kind of gone into this very bad realm. Boneless, skinless chicken breasts are probably some of the least flavorful, just from a cooking perspective, meats that you can buy. That's number one. They're some of the least nutritious that you can buy. Beef would outperform boneless, skinless chicken breast any day of the week in terms of nutrient content. So would fish and seafood, and so would eggs. But it's also an example of how messed up our food culture has become, where if you look at a chicken in the 1950s and you look at a chicken raised today in like a factory farm, it's going to look like Arnold Schwarzenegger of chickens. It's going to look like this big, bulky chicken on steroids. That's probably because we've created these chickens that have these gigantic breasts to, account for the fact that, people have become enamored of boneless, skinless chicken breasts, really with no regard to the rest of the animal. And the truth is, there's a lot of nutrition to the other parts of the chicken. Skin is really, really actually quite healthy for you. It's got a lot of collagen and gelatin and other things that can help with skin, hair, and nails. The bones, if you use that for stock or broth, is incredibly healthy as well. So boneless, skinless chicken breasts, part of the reason why people don't like eating healthy is because they think this is all you can eat. And this is some of the most bland stuff you can eat. Even chefs will say, my God, stop with the boneless, skinless chicken breast. And I agree, stop. There's other stuff and there's other ways to make poultry. Skin on, bone in chicken breast is awesome. It's delicious. And there are other parts of the chicken. And you can actually save a lot of money by buying the whole chicken and breaking it down. So in general, you want to try to go for pasture-raised poultry and kind of avoid the stuff where, you know, they're not eating what they're supposed to eat, and they're not able to kind of move around freely the way they need to. Lastly, let's talk about eggs. So for eggs, all the nutrition is in the yolk. Okay, so again, this is another way in which our food culture has just kind of gone crazy. Same thing with boneless, skinless chicken breast, right? We say, oh, give me my egg white omelet. All the nutrition is in the yolk. All the nutrition, the fat-soluble vitamins, the choline, all these different things are in the yolk. So if you really want to focus on nutrient density, eat the yolks. There's a great book out there by Liz Wolfe that I really like called Eat the Yolks, and I think it's absolutely right. From a nutrition perspective, this idea that you would eat egg whites is just absolutely, completely backwards. Purely from a taste perspective, you know, farm fresh eggs just are better. If you buy store-bought eggs, their yolks kind of look pale, and they don't quite have the same kind of tightness that you can get from farm fresh yolks. And farm fresh yolks, usually because the chickens are eating, you know, grass and what they're supposed to eat, they look kind of bright orange and they've really got this cool hue to them, and they just taste better. This is kind of a thing that goes across the board here. Food that comes from a natural source just tastes better. We could have done this video purely from a culinary perspective. Corn-fed, all the rest of that stuff, you know, kind of factory-farmed animal products just don't taste as good as the real thing. And people say the same thing about chicken. Chicken today tastes really, really bland compared to, you know, what our grandparents and our great-grandparents used to eat. So purely from a taste perspective, farm fresh eggs are better. What about things like cage-free and omega-3? Sorry, there should be an A there for omega-3. So cage-free, that does actually mean something in the case of eggs, because chickens who are used to produce eggs in factory farms are sometimes kept in cages. So you do want to make sure that your stuff is cage-free. Omega-3, omega-3 enriched, that just typically means that they have been given some flaxseed that contains alpha-linoleic acid, which the chickens then convert into a little bit of DHEA and EPA, a little bit more absorbable by our bodies. It's really not that much. You can get them, they're fine, but it's not like the be-all and end-all. Again, the top quality that you want to get is pasture-raised. Are you noticing a pattern here? Pasture-raised, grass-fed and grass-finished, wild-caught and sustainable. Get the animals as close to nature as you can. Buy from and support your local factory farm. When companies are doing the production of food, they have incentives to reduce costs, and they don't care about ethical treatment of animals. They don't care about environmental impact. They don't care about our health. And over the past, 50 to 60 years, our health has taken a steep decline because we have worshipped at the altar of cost and convenience at the expense of our health, the environment, and ethical concerns. So if you really want to make a difference in how food is produced, in your health, in how things impact the environment, and the ethical treatment of animals who are raised for food, it really does pay to buy from a local family farm or a farmer's market or something along those lines. All right, guys, so hopefully after this video you have a sense of which are the best options to buy, which are going to be the most nutritious. Do you need to buy these things to start out? No, it's better to just kind of eat the regular stuff and just kind of get started with healthy eating, but eventually this really does make a difference. We really do encourage people to try to buy this stuff as often as you can. All right, guys, this has been Robbie here from CrossFit South Bend. Thanks so much for tuning in, and we'll see you guys next time.